And opinions expressed during the related show are those of the show personalities and guest alone, and not those of Vic Canellis Media Group, its parent, affiliates, or stations. VCMG Live is not responsible for any content, information, or opinions expressed. User bears full responsibility for their reliance on such content, information, or opinions.
Welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. With over 20 years of real estate experience and selling over 150 homes a year, Laura Sanders is the #1 RE/MAX agent in the state of Florida for 2021. Join us each week as we discuss how to make money through buying and flipping homes, to renting versus selling, and everything in between. To join the conversation, call in live. 888-994-4995, Studio A.
Hi everyone, welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Every week we talk about something that will help you make a little money, or maybe just help you navigate this crazy world that we live in. Today we're going to talk with our favorite attorney, Charles Esposito with JK Closings, and we're going to talk about a couple of things today. Number one, we're going to talk about navigating the contract, and then navigating the condo world, because you definitely need some help to navigate.
All right. Yeah.
So the contract, we talk about this all the time, and one of the trick things that we have is whether or not the contract is fully executed when an addendum has not been presented.
Yeah, so this can go a lot of different directions. It depends on what the addendum is that we're talking about. It depends on how the offer was made. It depends on whether or not it's a disclosure versus an actual addendum to the contract. So for instance, HOA riders and condo riders are disclosures. But if they're made with an offer to the contract and the seller doesn't initial them, then maybe the contract's not effective yet. There are other addendums that say the seller or the buyer has to provide more information within a certain number of days, so the contract would be effective. But then if those documents aren't provided, then maybe the buyer can cancel. So one of the ones we were talking about previously was the compensation addendum. So there's an addendum that says the contract is contingent upon the seller executing or providing a compensation agreement, and it's within a certain number of days. So the base contract is effective when you sign the contract, and there's an addendum saying that another document needs to be provided within a certain number of days. The effective date of the contract is when the contract was executed and delivered to the other party, and then we're not changing the effective date based on the day that you provide the secondary document. So a lot of agents and attorneys as well get confused when we're adding addendums to the contract because they want to change the effective date. And my rule of thumb is always that the contract is effective when it's signed, fully executed, and delivered. And if there's an addendum like a rider that wasn't included in the offer or something to be provided later, we're not changing the effective date. Otherwise, you can make the argument that any addendum that's added later on will change the effective date, which doesn't make any sense.
No, yeah, because you have addendums all the time, like saying that the buyer and seller are agreeing to these repairs or what have you.
Right.
So let's say, for instance, though, you give an addendum that says that there's an HOA.
Right. So you have an association with a property, and let's say the buyer makes an offer and they don't attach the HOA rider to the contract. There's a disclosure in, we're talking about the as-is contract for residential transactions, which is what 99% of residential transactions in Florida are on this contract. There's a disclosure within that contract that says the buyer's advised that if there is an HOA, do not sign this contract unless you've read the HOA disclosure. So it's already advising the buyer not to sign the contract unless they've signed or read that disclosure. And so I always argue that if the buyer didn't make the offer with the HOA disclosure attached to it, the contract is still effective. They just need to be provided the HOA disclosure at some point, because that HOA disclosure allows them to cancel the contract within a certain period of time of receiving it anyway. So the buyer's protected.
HOA or condo?
That both of them do. The HOA and the condo.
Oh wait, let's go back for a second. If they check off a box, HOA addendum, and they submit a contract to the seller.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different. We're talking about there are boxes on the contract that say that there's an addendum attached.
Right.
So they check off a box and then they don't attach the addendum. Well, the offer that the buyer is making doesn't have the addendum on it. So if the seller signs everything, initials everything, and sends it back, is that contract effective? I would argue that it is effective because the buyer, maybe they erroneously checked that box. Whatever they did, they didn't attach that addendum to the contract, so their offer was made without that addendum. Now, maybe an attorney for the other side would argue otherwise, and it can turn into a bit of a gray area and an argument over that. So a lot of times what happens when there's a discrepancy around these things is we might have everybody sign something ratifying the contract, agreeing to what the effective date of the contract is and what all the time periods are. Because it does happen often enough where somebody forgets a document and then it's unclear as to whether or not the contract is effective. And one of the things we normally say is the further along you go into the contract, if the parties are abiding by the terms of the contract, there's probably a meeting of the minds there that the contract is effective from the date that it was actually executed and delivered. So if we're raising this before a deposit has been made, before anyone's done an inspection, before we've gone a day or two past when everything was signed, maybe the contract's not effective yet because there's not a meeting of the minds. But if you're arguing 15 days into the contract that there is no contract and the buyer's done an inspection, they've made their deposit, they've done an appraisal, the seller has started to clear title, do all of the things that the parties are supposed to do, odds are that there's a meeting of the minds and that contract is actually effective.
Interesting. Okay.
But you can make arguments both ways, and so that's why it's important as a realtor to cross your T's and dot your I's, make sure you have everything done the proper way.
So there was a new checkoff box that I have not seen yet, and this checkoff box said that the compensation was being as a credit.
Yeah, I think that's addendum FF actually. I was just reading about that today. So,
oh, good.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions from realtors, and they tend to be
create
repetitive.
A lot of reading. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are
there
different
was no
ways.
addendum. There was no addendum with it.
So
what
they
does
just
that
didn't
mean?
attach it. Yeah. So there are different ways to compensate a buyer's broker. A seller can be paying the buyer's broker directly through compensation. They can agree to that on a listing agreement. And then there's what's called the seller to buyer broker compensation form. And that's one way for the seller to compensate the buyer's broker. Another way to compensate the buyer's broker is to just offer a credit. So the credit can be towards the buyer's closing costs and towards the buyer's agent compensation, and there's a different form for that. And one of the forms is FF, and it's credit to the buyer's broker from the seller. And it states on there specifically that if, let's say the buyer is getting a loan, they're not allowed to have a certain percentage of credits above, sometimes it's 3%, sometimes it's 6%.
Yeah.
It depends on the type of loan that they're getting. So this addendum has a checkbox on it that allows the credit to go towards the buyer's agent's compensation and not be counted towards the closing costs, essentially. And that's what that addendum is for.
So, but if there's no addendum, and
if they submitted a contract without the addendum, what's the credit? Is it also written on the contract?
It's not. So how does that play out when you get to closing?
If I'm representing the seller, I'm arguing that checkbox is just erroneous. It's checked off. There was nothing submitted with it. There's no credit that's been agreed to. It's not part of the contract. So even though they checked off a box for an addendum, that could just be erroneous. Maybe they clicked it by accident. They obviously didn't attach it to the offer, so the seller didn't agree to anything.
Interesting. And if they never actually showed the house either, but they wrote the contract for them, it could be argued that.
Well,
because a lot of people come to open houses, they're writing offers.
Right. We don't know what the agreement is between the buyer and the buyer's agent. A buyer's agent is supposed to have an agreement signed with a buyer in order to show property. That could be a buyer-broker agreement, it could be a showing agreement, it could be a property pre-touring agreement, and then different brokerages have their own forms. As long as it's compliant with the NAR guidelines, it's a valid agreement. So those agreements could say that the buyer must pay a buyer's agent or not. There are some agreements that just allow the buyer's agent to show property, and then there's no actual agreement with the buyer to pay them. So as a closing agent, I have to go off of the separate agreements that the parties sign with their brokers. So a listing agreement, compensation agreement, buyer-broker agreement. If I'm unsure as to how an agent is supposed to get paid at closing, I need to review those documents to make sure we are putting the correct information on a statement. Sometimes agents and brokers are reluctant to give us that information because they think we're going to share it with the other side. But ultimately, if I don't have anything in writing showing how an agent's going to get paid, why should I be putting their compensation on a settlement statement? I need to have some sort of documentation.
Yeah, well, I've had some closing agent companies now, as the listing agent, ask me for my listing agreement.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
We ask for it, and that's because we don't have anything showing what you're supposed to get paid as a listing agent.
But wouldn't you think that a seller would object to it if it wasn't right?
Yeah. I mean, so if you tell us that your compensation is $5,000 and the seller signed an agreement that says they're only paying you $3,000, if we put $5,000 on the settlement statement because that's what you told us to put, and then the seller signs off on it, well, then they're paying you more than what your listing agreement says. Or if we send the settlement statement to the seller and it's not matching up with the listing agreement, they might say to us, hey, we didn't agree to that. Then we need to look at the listing agreement to see what you're actually supposed to get paid. There's nothing that's public that we would know how much a listing agreement is supposed to, a listing agent is supposed to get paid.
Now, do you think that an agent would have a buyer sign that they'd pay them 3.5% commission?
Yeah, I've seen agents. I've seen agents get paid all sorts of compensations.
Well, I had a guy add 1% onto the purchase contract, and then we're paying them 2.5%.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're getting paid 3.5%.
It's possible his buyer broker agreement needs to say exactly how much he's going to get paid. So if he had a buyer enter into a compensation agreement that says he's getting paid 3.5%, and then he negotiated with you and your seller to get paid 2.5%, he gets 2.5% from the seller and 1% from the buyer. If his buyer broker agreement doesn't say 3.5%, he could be violating NAR guidelines, because a buyer's agent is only supposed to get paid as much as what's written on their buyer broker agreement, and that's to prevent bait and switch. That's a consumer protection thing. So you can't approach a buyer and say, hey, I'll work for you for 1%, and then negotiate with the listing agent for 2 or 3%.
So, but if you, like, right now I've been telling everybody 3, but they're like, but if they're paying less, I want to pay less. I'm like, okay, we can adjust that
as
at the
a seller?
No, as a buyer's agent.
Oh, as a buyer's agent.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever your fee is your fee, and then you have to approach a seller and negotiate that. They're either offering compensation or they're not in their listing agreement. If they're offering compensation, it's whatever they agreed with their listing agent to offer. You know, most sellers and most listing agreements that we see are somewhere between 2 and 3%. Offering to cooperating broker compensation, if they're offering it. And of course, compensation is always negotiable. But once a listing agreement is signed as to what is being offered to a buyer's agent, the listing agent is supposed to offer that to the buyer's agent. They're supposed to put in writing what they're offering. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that happen in practice a lot. We're seeing buyer's agents submit offers with what they want for compensation, and then either the parties are negotiating over it, or there's the sellers or the listing agent is coming back and saying, oh no, we're only offering X percentage. Let's say it's 2 or 2.5%. Now the buyer's agent is supposed to collect the rest of that compensation from their client.
But you can change your agreement.
Or they can modify it and they can waive a portion of their compensation.
Okay.
Yeah. A buyer's agent cannot, on a buyer's agreement, say, you're going to pay me whatever the seller is offering.
And I've told that to people.
It has to be a definite compensation amount, and it has to be determinable, and that's one of the NAR guidelines. The whole point of the NAR lawsuit was to properly disclose to buyers and sellers what they are paying in compensation to agents. So that listing agreement and that buyer broker agreement is supposed to have a definite compensation that you can easily determine, and it can't just be open-ended.
Okay, so I mean, there's so much going on. So I had an agent that he said, the seller has to pay me. And I said, did you miss something somewhere? I'm like, I get that it should be standard practice for us too, for the sellers to offer compensation, right? But not all of the sellers.
Well, you would like for it to be as an agent, but it's not standard. It's never been standard practice. It's always been negotiable. Now there's been a lawsuit around that saying that it can't be standardized. But no, a seller doesn't have to offer cooperating broker compensation. We do know that historically, sellers that offer cooperating broker compensation sell their properties faster at higher dollar amounts and they get more buyers. We know that there's numbers to back that up. But if a seller opts not to offer cooperating broker compensation, they don't have to do that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my other fun subject, which is condos, which somehow I seem to be an expert in, which is kind of a lot of work. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Whether you're buying, selling, refinancing, or building your dream home, you have a lot riding on your loan specialist. Max Fish, a top 1% mortgage loan officer in the nation, will give you a same-day qualifying quote. Max Fish is committed to providing his customers with mortgage services that exceed their expectations. Ensuring that you make the right choice for you and your family is his ultimate goal. Contact Max Fish today at 954-729-6933 or max.fisch@nwmcorp.net.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FRIPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
Priority One Credit Union of Florida is a welcoming credit union that makes your financial success our number one priority. We offer lower loan rates, higher deposit rates, and common sense local loan approvals, with nationwide access through shared branching.
Hi, I'm Dina Hennessy, President and CEO at Priority One Credit Union. We are open to the community. Anyone can be a member of our credit union, and we would love to have you.
Contact us today at 954-335-5100. You can also reach us at PriorityOneFL.org. Your financial success is our priority. That's 954-335-5100.
You have been watching Making Money with Laura. For more information, contact Laura Sanders at 954-650-0827 or visit her website at theloracell.com. And now back to the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am Laura Sanders. Today, we're here with Charles Esposito. He is one of the amazing attorneys over at JK Closings, and they actually have so much information to give us. We're talking about all different things. We're talking about the buyer-broker compensation agreement. We're talking about the contract, how that works. So we just started talking about something during the commercial break that I found really interesting before we start to talk about what's going on with the condos. So what we just started talking about was is
the
that
listing agreement.
Right. So people call off of our listings all the time, and they say, I don't have representation. So we're obligated by law to still show them the house, right?
Yeah. Well, you're obligated by your listing agreement with the seller to try to sell the property.
Right.
You know, so you're going to want to show the property to a prospective buyer, and you're allowed to do that without a buyer broker agreement or anything because you have the listing.
Right.
Right. And then for compensation, like I was saying before, the NAR lawsuit and the guidelines, they want your compensation and the realtor's compensation to be clearly defined at the outset of the contract, whether you're getting a listing agreement or a buyer broker agreement. So the listing agreement has a section for compensation, and listing agents get paid a compensation, and then they are either offering a portion of their compensation to the buyer's broker, or the seller is offering compensation to the buyer's broker, or there's no compensation being offered to a cooperating broker at all. So the difference there is, let's say your seller enters into an agreement to pay you compensation. Let's say you've negotiated for 5%, okay? You then are talking to the seller about whether or not you are going to offer cooperating broker compensation to another agent, okay? And let's say you're going to offer them 2%. The contract is obligating the seller to pay a maximum of 5%, okay? And if there is no cooperating broker, then you are getting paid 5% because that's what the seller has agreed to pay you. And then you're offering a cooperating broker a certain percentage, or a flat fee, or whatever's agreed to, okay? There's a different way to write a listing agreement. Let's say that your fee was 2.5%, and the seller's agreeing to pay you that, and then they also want to offer 2.5% to a cooperating broker. Let's say a buyer comes along though and says, I do not want representation from anybody. I'm going to negotiate this myself. Now the seller has no cooperating broker to pay. So you as the listing agent are getting paid 2.5%, and that's all that the seller is paying in terms of compensation because there's no cooperating broker. So there are different ways to write a listing agreement and different compensation packages that a seller can agree to. And we see everything under the sun at this point.
So what would you recommend is the best way to do it?
It depends on whether you are the listing agent or the seller. If I'm the listing agent, I want the seller to pick a compensation package that I would agree to, and then as a listing agent, I would be offering cooperating broker compensation. And then if my brokerage ends up being the cooperating broker, then we retain the entire compensation. Okay? If I'm the seller, I might say, listing agent, I'm going to pay you this dollar amount, and I probably would negotiate a flat fee if it were me. But a lot of people pay a percentage of the purchase price. And then I might choose to offer cooperating broker compensation, or I might say I'm not offering cooperating broker compensation. I might give a credit to a buyer if they ask for it, but I'm going to negotiate that during the transaction when I get an offer. So that's how I would personally handle it as a seller, but also I am knowledgeable about real estate transactions. Most sellers want to rely on their agents to just represent them and handle it, and they care about bottom line. As a listing agent, I'm talking with my seller about bottom line. Okay, what's my net going to be? I want to list the house for $1 million. I want to net, $500,000 after my mortgage is paid off. How do we get there? And how do we get under contract as quickly as possible?
It's a good way to say it.
Yeah, so it's different for everybody. Everybody has different priorities. Some people, sellers, it's more important for them to sell it quicker than it is to net the most amount of money that they possibly can. There are some people that are carrying multiple mortgages or a rent and a mortgage, and they just need to sell quickly. So maybe the purchase price is going to be less. Maybe they're offering more incentives to a buyer because they want to close faster. So it really depends on each individual seller.
Okay. So, boy, we talked a lot today.
Yeah.
We're almost running out of time. I know that we were talking about the condo, which we're going to definitely have to come back again, but let's just talk about right now what's going on with the condo industry.
Yeah. The big change in the law for condos right now is there are structural integrity reserve studies that are required for all condos that are 3 habitable stories and taller. The deadline for that was December 31st of last year. A law just passed that came out July 1st, and the deadline for that is now December 31st of this year. So those condos that did not have their structural integrity reserve studies done, we were anticipating that they were going to get code violations this year or possibly fines and things like that. Their deadline has now been extended, so we're not seeing code violations on those properties, but they still have to get them done because the deadline is now this year. So that was one of the major changes. There are some other changes that affect owners of condos. They've made financing a little bit easier for buildings that need to finance issues that they have to repair due to milestone inspections or the structural integrity reserve studies. They're allowing more lines of credit. They're allowing a lot of different options. And then they also are requiring these associations, when they make a change, to upload the changes online for their membership within 30 days. So if you're a member of an association, condo, they are supposed to have all of their documents online in whatever portal they're using for that. And now when they make a change at a board meeting, they have to upload that to the portal within 30 days. So that's one of the other major changes.
That's awesome. So what is a good way for people to reach out to you?
954-779-5000. We have 14 offices throughout the state of Florida, from Miami Beach to Tampa. You can text or call that number, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I just closed in your Miami office this past week.
Yeah.
So that was a little satellite there. So that was cool, because some reason I say I don't go to Miami, but apparently I do.
I like taking the train to Miami. Yeah, going to take that next weekend.
Oh, that's cool. So, and if you're looking for a top agent, somebody that can get the deal done and save you the most amount of money possible and net you the most amount of money possible, give me a call, Laura Sanders, RE/MAX Direct, 954-650-0827, or you can look for me on the web at laurasell.com. And until next time, thank you always for listening to Making Money with Laura.
Thank you for tuning in for Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. To join the conversation, call us at the studio, 888-994-4995 Studio A, or contact Laura directly at 954-650-0827. Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. We look forward to seeing